Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future, to decide whether we want to build on the progress we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty.
When British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced in May that he was calling for new elections in Britain, it didn't exactly go as planned.
Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
In British politics, this is a very usual kind of speech, held in the usual place. Sunak was standing at a podium outside of 10 Downing Street. Except, in this case, it had started to rain. But Sunak carried on with the speech anyway. No umbrella.
It ended up with Rishi Sunak standing not in a little bit of kind of heroic rain, but pouring rain. Rain soaking his bespoke suit like it had just come out of he just jumped out of a swimming pool.
That is William Booth. He's the London bureau chief for the Post.
And there was metaphor written on his forehead. The British newspaper headline writers, their job was done before he'd gotten halfway through his speech, right? They were all in on making fun of him, that he didn't have the sense to get out of the rain, that this was sort of the state of his party, that they just couldn't catch a break.
Now, that metaphor is feeling more relevant than ever. Sunak and the Conservative Tory Party are widely projected to lose in tomorrow's election.
This is a big election for Britain, certainly. We've had 14 years of Conservative Party, Tory Party rule, 5 prime ministers who are all conservatives, and I think they're about to get their head handed to them in the election this week. It's interesting for everybody because Britain is an important country. I think it's going to go left. It's going to vote for Labour, while the rest of Europe is sort of thinking about going right. So that's also interesting and important.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Martine Powers. It's Wednesday, July 3rd. Today, I talk with William about the downfall of Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party, and the surprising leader who could replace him at a pivotal moment in European politics. So the fact that this is the outlook right now, and as you say, the Tories are about to have their heads handed to them, does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise people who live here, no. 14 years is a long time in power, and the Conservative Party has presided over a kind of chaotic reign. They went through Brexit, the ups and downs of that, which were kind of crazy. And then they had Boris Johnson, who had the parties in the middle of the pandemic. And then they went to Liz Truss, who was the shortest serving prime minister in British history. And then they got Rishi Sunak, who's been in power just for 18 months. And he's kind of been a stabilizing force. But 14 years, they seem out of gas. And the Labour Party is running on a campaign called Change.
I'm hoping you can dig a little bit more into that. What is the context that we as Americans need to understand to get, how the political landscape in the UK has shifted and how we sort of got to this point?
The Conservative Party always billed itself as, a party naturally sort of designed and built for power. It's not very ideological. It was supposed to be the competent party, the party that's good with finances, good with foreign policy, good in war and in peace. Your classic Tory is older, white, maybe lives in the south of England. They are for tradition, but they don't go overboard about tradition. They have some money in the bank. They are moderate on stuff like, on social issues. They're not out wanting to end gay marriage or this kind of thing. But they feel themselves the owners of the country, but they are the administrators of the country. But they've had just such a bumpy ride, particularly in recent years, since they called for the Brexit referendum, that they don't get high marks anymore for competency. And that's opened the door for Labour to try to come back. I mean, Labour was Tony Blair, so it's not a far leftist party. It was Tony Blair was Bill Clinton's old buddy, but people are tired of them. They don't like them. They want a new party running the place.
So my understanding is this is the first general election since 2019, though there have been a couple of leaders in the interim who were selected by Conservative Party insiders. That was Liz Truss and then Rishi Sunak. So tell me a little bit more about Sunak, like who he is, how he got to be prime minister, and what we need to know about his leadership.
Rishi Sunak has only been prime minister in Britain for 18 months, so he still has that new car smell. He is a former chancellor of the Exchequer, which is the British term for the finance minister. And before that, before he became a politician, he was involved in hedge funds. He attended good private schools. He went to Oxford. He went to Stanford, where he met his wife. He is the son of Hindus, Punjabi descent, who came to Britain from East Africa back in the day. He is himself a Hindu. He's kind of a sporty guy. He's apparently a fiend on the Peloton. And he's,
Do you know his username on Peloton? Because
you'd have to look it up somewhere.
I
wish I knew.
I would love to see what classes he's taking.
He's a lean, very fit guy, and he's clearly put in his bike time. He looks great. He wears really well made suits, and well spoken and very well educated and rich.
And when you say it seems like the Tories have demonstrated that they're not up to the job or that people are dissatisfied, you also said that Rishi Sunak, that he has been doing, in your words, like a relatively competent job. What are people dissatisfied with then? Like, what are the issues that have been leading people to the conclusion that this party doesn't have what it takes to lead the UK into the future?
Well, that's an excellent question. And, take a seat, because people are dissatisfied about a lot of stuff, right? Some people are very upset about immigration. The Tories promised that their immigration would be slashed, but record numbers of people are still entering Britain. Most of those, notably, through legal means and legal visas, though we still have tens of thousands of people crossing the English Channel in these dangerous rubber rafts. The economy isn't very good. The UK got hit by inflation in the same way that the US and the rest of the world did. It's sort of crawling its way back. Mm-hmm. You can't buy a home in Britain. There's not enough of them. Mortgage rates here are sky high, brought to you in part by Liz Truss. The schools closed during COVID, as many schools did, but very long here in Britain, and students are struggling.
And then healthcare, right? That's the one that I feel like I hear a lot about.
You nailed it there. Healthcare is the NHS, the beloved but beleaguered NHS, National Health Service, which is healthcare free on the point of delivery. So if Bill Booth goes into the hospital, they'll give me a new heart
for free
when I just walk through the door. So there we go. But the NHS has historically high waiting lists now. So if someone does have a medical emergency, you run down to the local hospital and someone does see you eventually or soon, even if you might have to lay on a gurney for a few hours. But if you need anything that a country like Britain needs, which Britain is an older country now, so people need hips and knees and MRIs and sort of managing long-term diabetes and liver problems and all this other stuff. Well, good luck getting an appointment to get a new hip. It can take months or years. And so the waiting times are very high, and that doesn't make people happy.
So then the alternative here is the Labour Party. Who is leading that party? And if they win, who's likely to be the next prime minister?
Okay, a cat named Kier Starmer is leading the Labour Party, also known as Sir Kier, because he was knighted back in 2014. He is a very kind of middle of the road guy. Some people would say he's a little dull, a little boring on the stump, certainly. Friends describe him and enemies describe him as quite ruthless behind the scenes. He has taken Labour from Nowheresville under Jeremy Corbyn into 10 Downing Street. It's just been a remarkable transformation of the party. He purged the hard left from the Labour Party. He is surrounded himself by allies and supporters, and I think he's going to win big time. I love talking about Kier Starmer because he seems sort of dull, but I think he's a story.
Yeah, say more about that, because even your point about dullness, that really is all I've heard about him, and I'm not really sure why everyone thinks that he's particularly boring, but it seems like you also find him fascinating.
They say he's dull because they haven't done their homework. They haven't read about him and studied him a little bit. I mean, Kier Starmer grew up he will be the most working class prime minister here in generations. His mother was a nurse who had lifelong illness. His father was a grumpy tool maker guy, mostly working by himself, that didn't praise his son very much. They grew up on, I guess I would call it sort of lower middle class to working class situation in like this Nowheresville commuter suburb of London. Right. And Kier is the first in his family to go to university. He does well. He decides he wants to become a lawyer. As a lawyer, he's not just a lawyer for the wealthy. No. Kier Starmer is a human rights lawyer. He's a swashbuckling, self-described radical lawyer, a lefty, who goes out and defends people in the Commonwealth countries of places like Uganda or Belize from the death penalty.
And so thinking about what his future might look like if he is prime minister, what is he promising? What is the Labour Party promising that they say is going to make things different from all the issues that people are dissatisfied about right now?
Alas, here we get to the dull part. I mean, the Labour Party has, and so did the Conservatives, they issued this thing called a manifesto, right? So hold on, it doesn't mean Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. They do a party manifesto that says what they're going to do. The Labour Party manifesto before this election was a supreme work in vague promises. They do want to create like a national energy company that will use alternative methods like waves and wind, that will be a British-held, government-held company that will give people better electricity prices at their meter. They say they're really going to help people with home mortgages and building homes. So right now, if you wanted to buy a home and you were a first-time home builder, unless you were Rishi Sunak, you could not afford to get one. It could be a potential big change for ordinary Brits. He promises he's not going to raise taxes for sort of the middle class and normal people, though he might jack them up for the well-to-do. But how he's going to do all this stuff, he doesn't provide tons of details, so it's a little hard to cost all out.
We've got plenty to say, because this campaign is about change. It's about turning the page and rebuilding our country. And whether you're a family that's been struggling with the cost of living crisis for months, if not years, with bills bearing down on you, whether you're a business that's been struggling locally and across the country with the damage that's been done to the economy, or whether you've served your country in uniform or in your community, this campaign is for you.
One of the main things he says he's going to do is sort of change the way Britain works, that he's going to make politics a little boring again. He's going to have a no-drama Starmer administration and not move from scandal to scandal. I mean, we'll see. The proof will be in the pudding on that one.
After the break, how the candidates are performing on the campaign trail, and what it means for the UK to be going left while many other parts of Europe are going right. We'll be right back. Why is this election happening now?
This election is happening now because in Britain, they have to call an election after 5 years. Rishi Sunak had until January 2025, to call an election. All the smart money, including yours truly, thought they would have an election in the fall, like October, November, but not Christmas. But Rishi called this election early. It's a snap election. Elections happen here very quick. The starting gun to the end is 6 weeks. And I think he thought his best moment was now, or he was concerned that his own party and rebels in his own party would eventually kind of eat him to death, with infighting and sort of party nastiness. The thinking was that if he went into the fall, he'd have better inflation numbers and better economic numbers to show that he turned the economy around. Just like in the United States, here in Britain, people's focus is on the economy, and cost of living and gas at the pump and inflation. People feel like their wages are sort of stuck and they're not moving, and then the country's not moving.
Bill, you mentioned that in the UK, the election period is quite short, which I think those of us in the US who feel like this election season is interminable, that we are a little jealous. But I'm wondering if you can talk through what have been the big moments of this campaign season and the moments that have really suggested where things are going to end up in terms of the Labour Party seeming so primed to win.
I guess it started with the Rishi announcing the election under the pouring rain.
Yes.
And then it goes from there. He appears under an exit sign. In another campaign event, Rishi Sunak went to Northern Ireland, to Belfast, to the shipyard where they launched the Titanic. And the symbolism of that was self-evident to many editorial writers. The footfalls and the mistakes sort of kind of continue from there. He doesn't understand that Wales isn't in the European soccer tournament this summer. There's all these like little micro mistakes that people keep focusing on. On the alternative side, Kier Starmer hasn't really made any news. He's sort of plodded ahead. He's made his campaign events. He hasn't really gotten a lot of great moments, but he hasn't had any real disasters or gaffes. The two men did debate twice. The first debate we wrote about in the Washington Post. The second one was almost too inconsequential to write about. But the first one featured sort of Rishi Sunak, an American style, kind of talking over Kier Starmer and keep insisting that Labour was going to raise everyone's taxes by £2,000, $2,500. And with Kier looking slightly annoyed.
I know you're going to hear a lot about the past in this election, but this election is about the future. This election is about the future, and I'm clear that I'm going to keep cutting people's taxes, as we now are. You want to put everyone's taxes up by £2,000, and this is really important. Independent Treasury officials have costed Labour's policies, and they amount to a £2,000 tax rise for every working family. No, this is important. Mark my words. Labour will raise your taxes.
I don't think Kier Starmer performed very well in that one because his big billing was that he's a very forensic, lawyerly chap.
So just to be clear, in this election, as you said, there's a Conservative Party, there's a Labour Party, but then there are also other parties that are involved as well. Can you talk through who those are and whether we need to pay attention to them?
Yes, we certainly do. There's the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, then we have a Green Party, we have a Liberal Democrat Party, that sort of very moderate, very centrist party. The big conversation in this election cycle is about the Reform Party, called Reform UK. This was originally the UK Independence Party that morphed into the Brexit Party, that is now the Reform UK Party. This is a party run and operated by a man named Nigel Farage. Farage is a good pal of President Trump and an early endorser of the Trump candidacy back in the day. Farage is a disruptor. He's really great on the stump. People like him. Critics say his supporters have a lot of people who have animosity to immigrants or to the point of racism. But Farage is a real threat to the Conservative Party. He is apparently right now just siphoning votes from them.
One other thing that I'm wondering about, again, as someone who isn't always plugged into what's going on in the UK, but the moments that do kind of break through for me are often related to Brexit. And you mentioned former Prime Ministers Theresa May and Boris Johnson. And it seems like a lot of the ups and downs, and particularly the downs of their times in leadership, have had to do with moments where Brexit was falling apart, or that it just became a very painful, publicly painful process for the UK to carry this out. Is there anything at stake in this election going forward for like the continuing status of Brexit, or like any possibility that the UK could be rejoining the EU under this new leadership?
Everything here in the last decade goes back to that drain hole called Brexit, right? And Kier Starmer says he's not going to call for a new referendum. He's not going to push to rejoin the European Union. But a Labour government will clearly make closer ties with Europe, with Brussels. They'll work out trade arrangements. They'll work out ways to do scientific collaboration, university students. I think they're going to do a lot of like mending offenses that the Tory Party tore down.
Interesting.
I don't think Britain, that is as turned off on politics right now as America, are in any mood to have any more elections. So I don't think there's going to be an EU referendum, a Brexit referendum anytime soon. So Brexit is something that British politicians don't want to talk about, because the minute when the word comes out of their mouth, voters just go into kind of a shock. They don't want to hear about it again. Been there, done it. Though I think the Labour Party will slowly kind of like reintegrate a little bit with the European Union again.
Huh. That's interesting, because you mentioned at the start of our conversation that this moment, this veer toward the left or potential, I think likely veer toward the left for the British government, is happening at this time when we're seeing other European countries veering toward the right. And this week we saw in France, the far-right National Rally Party dominated the first round of legislative elections. This was a big blow to French President Emmanuel Macron. And it does seem like these are two allies that are moving in opposite directions. What do you make of that? Or what do you make of the significance of the UK likely going toward the left at a moment when its allies are moving in a different direction?
I think it'll be a big deal for relations between Britain and Europe. I mean, Kier Starmer said the other day, look what just happened in France. This is why you need to support the sensible left, because we are the only alternative to these crazy populists and these parties filled with a bunch of racists and anti-immigrant people who promise a lot but don't get much done. To your question about what does this mean for Europe, I think the new Labour government and Kier Starmer will keep honoring the alliance with the United States and with Europe. They will keep supporting the war in Ukraine. They'll remain stalwart members of NATO. They'll, contribute to military, and they'll keep putting in their money. So I don't see any big foreign policy changes under Starmer if he's elected here in the next couple of days.
And what are you going to be looking for as the results come in beyond just, is Kier Starmer going to be the next prime minister?
I think the things we'll be focused most on in the British election will be how big the win for Kier Starmer and Labour is. Are the Tories just wiped out? Are they just win a handful of seats, and then then a million op-eds and editorials will follow about wither the Conservative Party. But I mean, they really could have a historic setback. If that happens and other parties don't come into the slipstream behind the Conservative Party, like this Reform Party led by Nigel Farage or these other parties, then Labour Party will have pretty clear running. And Britain and the rest of the world will get to see what a center-left party can do in 2024. I think that will be fascinating. Are their ideas good ideas, and do they work, and do people like them? So that will be interesting to watch.
Bill, thank you so much for explaining all this from across the pond.
Anytime. Happy to do it.
William Booth is the London bureau chief for The Post. You heard us mention the ongoing election in France, and before we wrap, I just want to give you some more updates on that. In the first round of voting last weekend, it was a clear victory for the National Rally Party. This is the far-right anti-immigration party led by Marine Le Pen. Here's Le Pen's victory speech on Sunday.
Les Français ont ainsi, dans un vote sans ambiguïté, témoigné de leur volonté de tourner la page après 7 ans de pouvoir méprisant et corrosif.
She said, in an unambiguous vote, the French people have demonstrated their desire to turn the page after 7 years of contemptuous and corrosive power. The National Rally Party stands a chance of winning a majority in the lower house of parliament for the first time. It could mean France's first far-right government since Nazi occupation in World War II. But the election isn't over yet. There's a second round of voting taking place this Sunday, and politicians on the left and in the center, including President Emmanuel Macron, are scrambling to try to find some unity to fend off the far right. We've also got a fun story from Australia. After a fungal infection wreaked havoc on the global frog population, scientists believe that they've found a solution: tiny frog saunas.
How I think of it is that the saunas can be like a little engine or factory that produces healthy, resistant frogs.
Anthony Waddell is a postdoctoral researcher at Macquarie University in Australia and is the lead researcher on the project. The frogs in question were fighting off chytridiomycosis, a fungal infection that causes their skin to grow up to 40 times thicker than normal. Waddell says that dozens of these frogs were placed inside brick boxes that were designed to mimic saunas that you might find at a spa or a resort. The temperature inside was roughly 100 degrees, and within a few weeks, the heat healed the infection.
And you could put that out in nature and hopefully leave it alone, and the frogs make use of it and help themselves.
Waddell and a team of biologists released their findings in the journal Nature last week. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. If you love the show, please help other people discover it by leaving a rating on Spotify or a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Today's show is produced by Sabby Robinson. It was mixed by Sean Carter and edited by Lucy Perkins. Thanks also to Trinity Webster Bass and Ali Bianco. I'm Martine Powers. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from the Washington Post.